Interview with the Vampire is giving Daniel Molloy the screen time he deserves as an underrated and Rice character. Jacob Anderson's Uncanny Lewis de Point du Lac launched the first 2 seasons, and Sam Reed is right on time as the Lestat de Lioncourt about to take over as the main character in Interview with the Vampire Season 3. However, Eric Bogosian, with a little help from Luke Brandon Field, centered on Daniel in this adaptation. In the best possible way, he threw a spanner in the works of what was a story about Louis, Claudia, and Lestat in canon. This spanner in the works is no oversight. In actual fact, this is a disruptive innovation that gets right to the heart of the Vampire Chronicles as a whole. Season 1 and Season 2 of Interview with the Vampire adapted the 1976 novel of the same name, the first book in Anne Rice's The Vampire Chronicles book series. Daniel Molloy was not a main character in this novel in the same way that Louis, Lestat, and Claudia were. But he had an importance in the series overall that, even in literary circles, is perhaps little understood and too seldom celebrated. Why Daniel is so powerful in the books. Daniel Molloy was special to Anne Rice. Daniel Molloy, Eric Bogosian, holding some cassette tapes in Interview with the Vampire Season 2 Episode 4. Daniel Molloy had a unique meaning personal to Anne Rice. Alcoholism killed Anne Rice's mother when Anne was 15, and it nearly killed Anne Rice. It reached perhaps an all-time low after the death of her 5-year-old daughter from leukemia. It's from this struggle that Interview with the Vampire was born, and it is this struggle that gives it its harrowing power. While Louis was the eternal addict, doomed to need to drink forever, Daniel was the real, human addict in the Vampire Chronicles. Without a metaphor to transform, alleviate, or soften the blow of his difficulty, Daniel Molloy may have been the closest Anne Rice got to a frank examination of the real social issues at the heart of her story. In The Queen of the Damned, Daniel was a homeless alcoholic queer facing down death every time he fell asleep on a bench. Anne Rice's vampires romanticize death, but in Daniel, Anne Rice recognized death as the logical conclusion of an unjust system that locked out its most vulnerable, and she raged against it. With the glamour of vampirism stripped away, Daniel's horror wasn't gothic, it was worse, it was real. Perhaps Anne Rice needed the veil of vampires to start to talk about these things, because it was too painful to write her whole series with this searing honesty. A journalist and writer like Rice, the quintessential struggling creative, Daniel was all too close to Rice's own experience. As Daniel wandered the streets half-crazed, the Vampire Chronicles was suddenly no longer a gothic fantasy, it was stark social realism, and the author's anger was incandescent. How the show changes Daniel Molloy from the books. Daniel is a lead in the show. Daniel was not a chief actor in the events of the first Vampire Chronicle, like he is in the novel's TV adaptation, Interview with the Vampire Seasons 1 and 2. However, he was totemic in the series as a whole, and the show is capturing this significance. In the book, Daniel was 22 when he met Louis and Armand and got his Interview with Louis published. In the show, Daniel was 22 when he met Louis and Armand, but never got his Interview published. That allows Daniel to have his redo Interview with Louis 49 years later in the show.